Hi and welcome back to the Girl Gone London channel. Today we're looking into the whys, the hows, and the whats of UK versus USA ambulances. How much does it cost to take an ambulance in the UK versus the USA? Why are most British ambulances yellow while most American ambulances are white? And why do the sirens sound different? Let's answer those questions starting now. So first, let's talk size, because both the UK and the USA have the box style of ambulance like this, as well as the van style like this, but the smaller van style seems to be more popular in the UK, and the larger boxy style seems to be more popular in the USA. Why? Well, in general, most vehicles in the US are just larger than the ones in the UK anyway, so this applies to ambulances as well. American roads are wider with fewer blockages or parking on streets, so they just naturally can take larger vehicles. It doesn't mean larger is better. You can still fit quite a bit into the van style ambulance, but typically the American box style of ambulance is fit onto the bones of an existing cargo truck. And since the cargo transport vehicles in the US just tend to be bigger anyway, they remain bigger when they're used as ambulances. Then there's a cultural view in the USA that bigger is better and smaller is inferior, as well as the fact that often American ambulances are called multi-role vehicles, which means they're possibly also part of the fire department, so they might be carrying extra gear like rescue fire gear. Now let's talk sirens, because there are multiple types of sirens, but the UK ones tend to use a higher pitch and lower volume than American ones. Which tend to go for the louder but lower pitch option. There are different types of patterns in sirens, so it's not accurate to say that one country or service always uses a particular type of siren, but if you had to do a study, you'd likely find that the American sirens overall are slower and more of a wailing sound, while the UK ones are higher pitched and faster. There's a few reasons for this. Firstly, European sirens originated from car horns, which has that type of high-pitched noise, whereas American sirens originated from hand crank sirens, giving you that lower wailing sound. Then you've got geography to contend with. The UK is more densely populated with narrow streets, whereas America tends to have more of a suburban sprawl and less dense areas with widely spaced low buildings and wide roads. The wailing sound, then, of many American ambulances are more longer range and they can be heard from further away. This works for this geography. But in the UK, the higher pitched but lower volume UK sirens are more suited to narrower streets with more densely built up areas and houses and buildings that are really close to the sidewalks. Then you've got the matter of whether the ambulance uses the sirens and the lights or just the lights in an emergency situation. I was actually surprised when I first moved here because I noticed that often ambulances in the UK, even while going to an emergency situation, might only use the lights and not turn on the sirens. Particularly at night, if there's no traffic, they're not going to sound the sirens for no reason. In the part of America where I grew up, it seemed that ambulances always have on their sirens. So if the lights are on and it's an emergency situation, the sirens are also on. I did a little bit of research into this, and while this isn't the hard and fast 100% rule, I did notice that a lot more of my research did confirm what I thought. I found this information also from the Hanford Fire Department site, which again, the ambulances and fire trucks kind of work in tandem in a lot of places in the US, and they state that by state law, they must provide a reasonable warning to any potential traffic, and if they do not, they're at risk of being held liable for injuries or accidents. So using the sirens at all times, even at night, if there's like little chance of traffic, make sure that they are doing everything they can so somebody could not say that they have not given a reasonable warning that they are coming through. Now let's talk color, because American ambulances are often white and red, but there isn't a specific nationwide requirement. They can also be part blue or part gray with a bit of green or orange. However, what you will notice from this quick scroll of American ambulance photos is that yellow ambulances that are found in the UK are not popular in the the US. But they weren't always yellow in the UK either. For many years, ambulances in the UK were painted white, as you can see from some historic photos here. The white was a very purposeful choice. It made them out to be clean and clinical, which is exactly what you want your ambulance to be. But there was a little bit of a catch because white vans are also just generally popular in the UK, which meant that ambulances were not always recognizable instantly from far distances. So most of the UK switched in the 2000s to fit a more European model of color. They use a color known as Euro Yellow RAL 1016 that stands out noticeably to the human eye. The Scottish Ambulance Service, however, still uses mostly white for their ambulances with some streaks of yellow and green. And then you have other types of vehicles like non-emergency medical vehicles or patient transport vehicles that still mainly use white in the UK, but these are different from the emergency ambulances, so these vehicles will not be the ones that you need to move over for with sirens and lights and all of that. Speaking of color, the flashing light color is different between both countries. So in the UK, the color blue is predominantly used for ambulance services when it comes to the flashing lights. Blue is an easy color to see from the distance, especially in the dark, and it's used while flashing for fire engines, ambulances, and police vehicles. But when it comes to ambulances in the USA, red and white flashing lights are the main color used. Blue typically tends to be related to the police service in America. And again, this is a general statement because it is very varied, so there probably are examples that do not fit what I'm saying, but these are the generalizations we can make. Now, if you're a history buff, you're going to like the following section because before we talk about the cost of an ambulance in the USA, we're going to talk about the history of the ambulance in both countries. In the UK, as late as the 1890s, patients with life-threatening conditions were simply taken to the nearest hospital on wheeled stretchers by basically whoever was available. Taxi drivers, policemen, firefighters, etc. An ambulance service was established in London just before the turn of the 20th century and had 6 ambulance stations with, at this point, horse-drawn ambulances. Petrol ambulances didn't come around until 1904. Then in the 1930s, the government reorganized and gave the responsibility for ambulance services to county councils, and of course, soon following, the UK entered wartime. Ambulance quality fell at this point for obvious reasons, and often regular vans and sometimes buses and civilian cars had to be used for ambulance services due to the lack of available ambulances. I have never said the word ambulance so many times in my whole life. Now, in the late 1940s, the UK government decided that ambulances needed to be available for all who needed them, and each part of the country began creating more standardized and recognizable services, so less like cobbled together. For instance, a London-wide service was created in 1965 when they took 9 existing services and consolidated it into one to work better together. By the 1950s, many councils had started to buy their own vehicles and train their own ambulance staff for services. Then in 1964, the Miller Report launched the idea that ambulances should be able to treat within the vehicle as well as transport patients, which seems obvious in today's ambulances, but was really only fully possible once ambulance services became more standardized and permanent fleets were purchased and staff were trained. Across the pond, on the other hand, the first advancements in ambulances came in the 1860s during the Civil War, when military physicians built new means of transport for the battlefield, eventually settling on what was known as the Rucker ambulance. This was a 4-wheeled design and, again, was mostly designed for use on the battlefield. The first hospital-based ambulance service starts in Ohio around 1865, and the horses were basically kept in harness while they were awaiting a call to help. America starts mass-producing ambulances around the year 1909, and there are many changes throughout the 1900s in the look and style, like this one from the 1970s. If ambulance history is a specific interest of yours, I've included links in the description to this book on the history of American ambulances and this book about British ambulances. Now let's finish up this video by talking about the cost, because perhaps the biggest difference of all comes down to the cost of riding in an ambulance. In the USA, due to the private healthcare system, ambulance rides are not free. Even if it's just taking you to the hospital as transport with no work performed on you, you're looking at an average range of anywhere from like $1,000 to $4,000 for the privilege, and that's just for the ambulance. That does not include any medical expenses you actually incur while in the hospital. They won't make you swipe your card and pay them then and there. It's all added to the ultimate bill you'll get later on, and people with insurance will have different figures than people without insurance, but someone's going to pay for the ambulance ride at the end of the day. In the UK, thanks to the NHS, and in my opinion, a superior system, ambulance services are not charged to the patient. Yes, the public as a whole pay for the service through taxes, but there's no concern after calling an ambulance that you are going to be given any sort of bill or amount to pay. Same if you visit an NHS hospital as a British citizen entitled to care. This always blows the minds of Americans who aren't used to this different system, but this meme sort of sums up the joke about being picked up in an ambulance in the USA, as it can be so expensive that you're already wondering if it's really worth it. Now that brings me to the end of the video. Leave a note in the comments with any information you have to add to this video or something new that you learned. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks as always for watching, and have a good day.